The CISO is no longer just a technical leader. They have to be a business leader, and you have to be able to bridge that technical and business gap and then figure out what works for you.
You're listening to KBcast, the cybersecurity podcast for all executives. Cutting through the jargon and hype to understand the landscape where risk and technology meet. Now, here's your host, Carissa Breen.
Joining me today is Lambros, CEO and founder from RockCyber, and today we're discussing foundational business knowledge for a CISO. Rock, thanks for joining and welcome.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So I want to get straight into it, and I want to hear, we spoke a couple of weeks back or a few months back around the interview, what we were going to discuss. So I want to maybe hear from yourself around your thoughts about foundational business knowledge. So what does this sort of look like according to you?
Yeah, it's kind of a big term, right? It can go many different ways. But I think there are some basic fundamental concepts you need to understand on top of just general business fundamentals like entrepreneurship, because frankly, when we're going after budget, AKA our revenue as cybersecurity leaders, we've got to act as entrepreneurs and salesmen within the organization. Understanding business models, understanding market dynamics, supply and demand, competitive analysis, business ethics, all that kind of stuff. But very specifically, I think finance and accounting knowledge is important. Be able to read a financial statement. You've got to be literate in being able to read those statements so that way you can understand how your company is doing. How can you propose cybersecurity initiatives without understanding the context of the organization and the operating environment that it's in? And is there money to spend or is there not money to spend? Along with that goes budgeting concepts, cost management, basic accounting principles, the difference between CapEx and OpEx, and just all those items that'll help you make some more informed decisions. And then, of course, there are other areas like marketing and sales that you need to have an understanding of because your initiatives may be directly impacting the sales process, right? Understand operations and supply chain management, particularly if you're in a manufacturing type of industry or a utility. HR, we all have to deal with HR. Strategic management. Part of this conversation is talking about how do we up-level the CISO to be able to have those strategic level conversations. How do we get that CISO seat at the table that we're constantly, kind of complaining about, right? That we don't have the seat at the table. Business communications, you got to communicate to your team up and down throughout the organization, and even data analysis, right? You don't have to be a data scientist by any means, but as a CISO, you're going to be dealing with a lot of information coming at you every day. And, having the ability to process that information quickly and make sound business decisions for the organization is critical.
Yeah, great points. And I totally agree with you. There's a lot of things going on in there. So before we move forward, I'm curious then to know, would you say there's certain elements in what you've just discussed that need to be more of a focus than perhaps some of the other items? And would you say that historically people haven't really been focused on these items in a CISO type role?
Yeah. With regards to any of the specifics I just talked to, I think finance and accounting and, kind of allows you to have those strategic management conversations, which then starts getting you invited to the table, right? To the table where those strategic decisions are being made. With regards to why do CISOs not have this foundational business knowledge? Many of us grew up on the tech side. We came up from tech backgrounds, whether it be in security itself or general IT or development, whatever the case may be. And so that's where our deep expertise lie, and that's where our comfort zone is. But as the role of a CISO is evolving, there is an increased demand for CISOs who can bridge the gap between technology and business strategy. Many CISOs, they've probably been promoted from technical roles without receiving adequate training in any of those non-hard skill business areas. And then limited exposure because we have traditionally come up through the technical ranks. We probably haven't had exposure to other areas in the organization like marketing, like finance and accounting, like legal, Although more and more, we are definitely getting more exposed to the legal side of things. And then also organizational culture. Where does security fit in the overall grand scheme of things? Are you kind of siloed reporting to a CIO, CTO, which kind of pigeonholes you more, tends to pigeonhole you more into a more technical leader, at least perceived as a technical leader? Or, are you elevated to having those conversations with the C-suite? Organizational culture is going to have a lot to say with it.
Okay, so a couple of things in there which was interesting, and I do hear your point around. Of course, a lot of people come from the tech side; they're embedded in it. They, that's what they're familiar with. I get all that, but if you're like a CMO, for example, in working in marketing, you still need to have, to your terms, foundational business knowledge. Like if you're running a marketing campaign and you're running advertising and all these things, like you still need to understand P&Ls and accounting and finance. So how come people in the CMO role or HR directors, how come they historically have had this foundational business knowledge, and like a CISO just doesn't have to necessarily worry about that as much? Like that seems evident when you're at a senior level, no matter what function you're doing.
Yeah, right. Marketing and sales, you can make a direct line to revenue. HR, you can make a direct line to revenue with regards to employee recruiting and retainment. So, and you're also working, particularly HR, you're literally working with every group within the organization. You get exposed to a lot of different areas and functions. Whereas in the CISO role, traditionally, again, you've kind of been siloed to the technical side of things forever. Security was a quote unquote IT problem. Now that is completely flipped on its head. Even here in the States, the Security and Exchange Commission, which governs publicly traded companies, are laying out new cybersecurity rules for organizations. So it's no longer, put your head in the sand and let the tech guys deal with the type of problem. It is more and more of a business problem. And that's why the demand is there for CISOs to be able to bridge that gap between the technical side and the business side.
And do you sort of see that changing over time? Like, I guess the answer is yes, but I think there is still probably a lot of people that are still very focused just on the technical side. But when you're at that level and you're senior, like that's part of it. But a lot of your role when you're getting into a more senior job is managing people and stakeholders and teams and boards. How do we sort of move forward to get closer to that in terms of closing that gap?
Well, there's got to be an interest on the CISO side, right? Or a realization on the CISO side that cybersecurity is no longer this black magic, if you will, that we used to get away with in the early 2000s. And, then it's, having some self-initiative and going out and exposing to yourself to those concepts. Get up from behind your keyboard and go meet with your financial analysts in your organization, with marketing, with operations, with accounting, or whatever the case may be. Broaden your horizons. And you don't need an MBA to do all this. There are plenty of books out there where you can pick up how to learn to read a financial statement. Go talk to your financial analyst or CEO if you're trying to learn and you have questions. If you're not a publicly traded company and your financial statements aren't publicly available, well, some of your competitors probably are. Go look at theirs. You're probably in a similar situation as an organization. So a lot of it is just, you've got to understand that it's no longer a nice to have, it's a must to have, understanding the business and having those business fundamentals. And then, going about your own way that works for you. I have an MBA. MBA is great, but you don't need one to go get those skills.
So what happens if someone is a CISO or CISO or whatever, whoever people pronounce it, is what if they say, I actually just want to do the technical side of it. I actually don't want to learn foundational business knowledge. Does that then mean that they just shouldn't be in that role? Does that then mean someone who's... So do you think people should be self-selecting out then of these roles? Because I don't know whether historically a lot of people who are in these roles have just gotten there by default. There was no one else. They were the systems engineer. Now all of a sudden they're the CISO because they've been there for 20 years. But maybe they're not the best person for that role. What do you think about that?
Ideally, right, in a perfect world, yes, absolutely. Self-select yourself out of those roles. Go back into an architecture role or an engineering role. But I don't know how you pull off, being a great security architect without being able to align solutions to the business either, right? But there is frankly, the financial component. CISOs get compensated very handsomely. Many companies don't have an alternative parallel path to being like a technical director or a technical fellow or something like that, to where you can earn that executive level compensation whilst remaining on the tech side. And so I think that fundamentally needs to get fixed. And then we'll see more of the self-alignment as time goes on. But right now, there's very few companies have that path, or you can be as compensated as well as a CISO by remaining in a technical role.
So if you're like a CEO or you're a board member and you're like, look, I don't know whether my CISO is the right fit for the role based on they don't have the foundational business knowledge, everything we've spoken about already, is there anything that sort of would illuminate to them that this person isn't right for the role and maybe I need to think about getting someone else in that's going to fit that? Because again, as you've clearly articulated already, these are the things that are required, that are necessary to move forward and to evolve as an organization as well, of getting those basic foundational, business knowledge as a CISO.
Yeah, anytime they come storming into a boardroom or, the executive suite, just spitting out technical jargon and spreading kind of fear, uncertainty, and doubt, like, oh my God, the world is falling. If we don't do this, we're going to get hacked, without doing any sort of cost-benefit analysis, risk analysis to the organization, anything like that. To me, that's a red flag.
So what if people do that? I mean, there's reasons that people say that people lead with FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, but is there anything that comes up in your mind why people lead with that?
Well, I think it's that lack of foundational business knowledge, right? Because if you don't have that lack of foundational business knowledge and you can't make your argument in terms of what impact it has to the business, in terms of business outcomes, in terms of cost, ROI, return on investment, budgeting, and whatnot, just say, hey, I need $1 billion to go secure this one thing over here, or else we're going to be hacked and we're going to have lawsuits on our hands, and. Well, that's absolutely a component of it. That shouldn't be your entire argument, and that shouldn't be how you lead into a situation.
So would you say that CISOs historically, or some CISOs, haven't been the best at framing their argument, perhaps? Like, I need $1 billion, and if we don't do this, we're going to get hacked and breached, and we're going to have all these fines on our plate. Do you think it's more that front on how to position something? Because I've just seen over the years, like, how people communicate, they frame their argument, how they put forward a case, maybe isn't executed the best, and therefore we have people offside. We have people that are stressing out about, we could be breached if we don't spend $1 billion. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's not a lack of want to, it's a lack of know-how, right? Everybody wants to present the best business case they can. But again, if they don't fall back on that foundational business knowledge, the thing at the top of their mind is, well, if I can't speak at their level, I'm just going to try and scare them. And I've seen that time and time again. And we, as a collective CISO community, are getting much, much better at that. But historically, like I said, back in the early mid-2000s, we like sprinkled a lot of black magic just all over the place. Like, hey, you don't need to worry about this. We're just going to do some stuff over here. You'll be okay. You don't need to understand, you being CEO, CFO. You don't understand how it works. Just trust us that we're the smartest people in the room here. And that's quickly going away, being debunked.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. And this is the other thing, like, just because obviously a CISO is obviously a very intelligent, smart individual. Of course, they're in that role and they are smart. But then it's like, equally, the CFO guy is smart in his own discipline, right? So it's like the CISO doesn't necessarily know everything the CFO does. It doesn't mean that the CFO guy is not as intelligent. It just means it's not his area of expertise. So I don't know where a lot of this, I'm the smartest guy in the room stems from, because, like, how do you measure that? Because the CFO guy is, like, equally pretty smart too.
That's a great question. How do you measure the smartest guy in the room? There is no smartest guy in the room, right? That's the approach I take. You may be the smartest guy in the room surrounding cybersecurity, but the CFO is going to be the smartest guy in the room surrounding the money he's going to give you for your cybersecurity initiatives. And, I kind of share this story that both my parents were born and raised in Greece. So I grew up bilingual, and like it or not, If you grow up, through the technical ranks, you're still picking up some business knowledge around the way. Not much, maybe, but enough to understand that there's a there. So my point is, my mom doesn't speak English well at all. After I left home and moved out on my own, my Greek has kind of fallen off a cliff. But it's my opportunity. Like, we communicate in this like weird Gringlish right now because she knows enough English. I know enough Greek. We can get by. But it's really, it's up to me. I'm the bilingual one. It's up to me to solidify my Greek and to better communicate with my mom. It's the same thing with CISOs in the business, particularly CFOs, right? You've got personal finances. You may have a financial planner. It's not like you've never had a financial conversation in your life, right? So you've got a baseline there. But CFOs, they very well, up until maybe the last 15 years, had never had a cybersecurity conversation in their life, right? They didn't grow up in those ranks. They didn't grow up around those conversations. They're not talking about cybersecurity in their personal lives. So I think it's really up to us to bridge that gap.
Yeah, I totally hear what you're saying. Absolutely. It's the baseline. And you are right, because everyone, since you're a kid, you open up your first bank account, you start to learn about like money at like a very rudimentary level, of course, but you are right. Like, no one really grew up like back in the day thinking about cybersecurity, and now that's changing. So then I want to sort of direct the conversation now onto the CFO. So how about like asking for money from your CFO? This is something that we probably as an industry haven't gotten right. We're still finding our feet on how to do this properly. As you sort of mentioned already, Rock, like people come in and say, oh, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and don't worry about us. We're the smartest people in the room. Leave it to us. What's your approach? How would you approach if you've got to go and get budget money from a CFO? How would you approach it?
The number one thing for me is you have to understand the business context. And what do I mean by that? Before talking to a CFO or anybody who's got any say over how money is going to be doled out throughout the organization, it's crucial to understand your organization's overall business goals. What is that stake in the ground or that North Star that they're striving towards? What are their strategic priorities? And what are their financial constraints? Meaning, are you operating in a very high growth environment, or is it a down economy and the organization is doing everything to cut costs? That'll help inform the type of business case you're going to present. And then it'll also help you align your proposed cybersecurity objectives to those organizational objectives. Right? Because if you've done your risk management strategy properly, you understand which risks impact those organizational objectives the most. And those are the risks that you're going to prioritize. And then CFOs, they like numbers, right? So it's not always possible, but quantify the risks and benefits as much as you can. Whether that be, hey, we're going to decrease friction in the sales process, to be able to roll off a widget off of the manufacturing line sooner, to automating some security processes so that code is rolled to production sooner and features get out to customers sooner. And what does that entail? Are you reducing costs? Are you increasing the potential for revenue? Being able to understand that and use that data. CFOs and C-suite in general, CEOs of the board, love data and statistics that support your argument from external sources. They love sources like Gartner and Forrester and McKinsey, all those types of groups. And then write your business case. Write a well-structured business case that clearly outlines the scope, objectives, anticipated outcomes of the proposed cybersecurity initiatives. Make sure you include a detailed cost-benefit analysis, estimating the financial impact. Is there a payback period or a potential return on investment in terms of risk reduction and potential cost savings? And then the CFO is going to be like, great, what's my timeline? So make sure you've got a realistic implementation timeline for those initiatives. And then you also want to demonstrate accountability. You have to demonstrate that you understand the regulatory and compliance situation of the company. Are there any alternative funding sources? Meaning, we love tools and toys and stuff with blinky lights in the cybersecurity field. We have a ton of tools traditionally that overlap capabilities? Is there any rationalization that you can do there to save costs and then reallocate those funds to the new proposed cybersecurity initiatives? Can you partner with another group or department, development, sales, marketing, whatever the case may be, to split the costs on the project? And then finally, communication. Speak with your CFO as often as he will allow you to, he or she will allow you to, and just be open about any pitfalls that are coming up, any constraints within the project, anything that may delay the timeline or the payback period.
Those are excellent points. I think that's really logical, methodical, makes sense, and I think it's a great place to start. So I want to press on this a little bit more because I think this is really, really important. In terms of business case, how would you present it? Would you present it in a slide deck? Would you be like a Word document? Like, how would you do? And then like how long? And I know that's like a bit of a dumb question because like how long is a piece of string? I'm just trying to get like examples. Now, I used to write reports for the CISO to present back so we get funding and stuff like that. So I'm just using my previous sort of life as being an analyst on writing these things. So I've got my own version of it, and I don't think I have all the answers. I'm just genuinely curious to hear what your point of view is, because I think this is something that people often are not sure about. Like, well, how do I present? How much wording should I put on the document or not on the document? Like, how much detail should I go into? I think these finer points are really critical to getting that outcome from your CFO.
The first thing there is you have to understand your audience, understand what that CFO likes, what they're looking for. Do they like a report on their desk so that they can have a week to evaluate and then circle back up with the conversation? Do they just want, hey, show me a slide deck summarizing things, and then I'll go back and look at a deeper report later? Does he not care about a deeper report? Does he only care about the deeper report? So kind of understanding your audience in that regard is critical. And it's kind of hard to do that if you haven't already established a relationship. With regards to the business case itself, I think you're almost always inevitably going to end up with a summary slide deck, at least, if not a deeper detailed slide deck. You're probably not going to get an hour with a CFO. You may, but it's probably going to be more likely a half hour. And that might be on a quarterly basis. But make sure that, it's kind of structured well, like what we already talked about, but make sure that you have a problem statement, that you have identified a problem that needs a solution. We, in the tech community, love to find solutions and create problems for solutions because we think it's a new shiny toy. I'll have clearly identified objectives and scope, right? Define the specific objectives of the initiative, outline the scope of work required to achieve them, the level of effort. How does the initiative align with, again, the organization's strategic goals? What's your risk management strategy? And more importantly, not just the cyber risk management strategy, but your project risk management strategy. What's going to happen if the timeline gets extended or you lose resources during the project, all that kind of stuff. The CFO wants to make sure that you've taken all that into consideration. Return on investment. Nothing perks a CFO's ears like a return on investment number. If there is, right? It's not always possible to calculate, but you can almost certainly align to cost reduction, improvement in processes, streamlining processes, and that streamlining of processes could lead to cost reduction. There are a bunch of different angles that you can approach that. Again, your implementation plan, be open and honest about it. Open and honest about if there are any hiccups in that implementation plan. Cost benefit analysis and sensitivity analysis. Not only the cost benefit, but the what if analysis of the key variables that go into your cost benefit. Meaning if funding gets reduced by 10%, well, it drives the timeline out by 25%, right? That type of analysis. And then always have alternatives, right? Always have alternative solutions, alternative recommendations. And so the CFO understands that you're not just focused solely on one way to do things, but then also at the end of it, present your recommendation to the CFO and along, with your why, supported with the business case. It's much easier to work off of a whiteboard that's already got some stuff up there than just sitting in a room and staring at a blank whiteboard. That's my analogy.
So true. Something to work from. Okay, there's something in there that you said which was interesting. You said, obviously, start with a problem statement, which is fair. And then you said in cybersecurity, we're very focused on, sort of maybe making up a problem and then finding a solution. Where do you think that comes from? And do you think as well that we've got a lot of problems that weren't really a problem, but there's a solution to the problem, and now we've got this tool or product or service or whatever it is?
100%. Like the problem may exist in the marketplace, but it may or may not exist in your organization. And, being cybersecurity, we grew up as, frankly, geeks. We like playing with the technical tools. And so, I don't think CISOs are necessarily any longer going down that path looking for problems to solutions. But, the individual contributors, the security engineers, the security analysts, the ones who are banging on the keyboard all day, every day in the tools, they may be, right? And it's, part of being a CISO is weeding out, okay, is there a legitimate business problem here to solve? Or is it shiny new blinky toy, next gen, whatever it is that our engineers want to get their hands on? So part of our job is filtering that out.
But isn't it like anything though? Like look at I don't know, look at females, for example, and makeup. Like all this whole industry was created that people, it's like, billions and billions of dollars spent on like makeup, for example, that is like, for someone who wears it, I don't know whether I'm the right person to talk about this, but it's like, did we just sort of created this thing that people now need to spend money on. And then all of a sudden companies are making so much money out of it. So would you say that if we align it back to security, that vendors, service providers, etc., are profiting off the back of these made up make-believe problems?
I don't know if the vendor side is. That's so hard to gauge because there are so many good vendors out there, so many bad vendors out there. And part of a vendor's job, frankly, is to convince you that you have a business problem that can be solved by their tool, right? If you don't have a solid understanding of your business, how your business functions, those organizational objectives, you can be easily talked into that. Maybe, their problem statement doesn't apply to you. Maybe it does apply to you, but it's a 2-year problem, not a must solve tomorrow problem. So, I think there's some of that. I can't blame it all on the vendors of trying to prey on companies. It's our job to understand, what are our business problems, what are our desired business outcomes, and to search for solutions for that. And it's not always a technical solution. We say the triad of people, process, and technology. And I always say there's a reason why people and process come first. Technology is the easy part. Implementing technology is the easy part. But getting people to online and potentially changing business processes or the way you do things, streamlining things, that is much harder to do across an organization than implementing a new widget.
Yeah, look, I hear what you're saying. And like I said, like I'm thinking in my mind actually is, it's not the vendor's fault. It's just, this is marketing. And for someone who works in media and marketing, this is my job. This is what I understand. My job is to create awareness and interest about a product and a service. So for me, I think that it's like any industry out there. Like look at the fitness industry, like all these fancy drinks and all diet pills and all like, do you really need all these things or can you just go out and walk or exercise? Like there's all these additional things that people have created, but I think it comes down to really good marketing. And I think that's just how the world sort of goes around. And I think that, again, like mentioned to your point earlier, Rock, like, could we reduce it? Is there overlap? Is there tools sitting in our environment that we're not utilizing at all? Can we get rid of those? And so I think really looking at that and doing that cost analysis of maybe our business has changed. Maybe we don't need all of these tools now. And then you mentioned something before around the analysis, which I get. And for someone who historically was a reporting analyst, do you think there's a little bit analysis paralysis though? Like how do you get to the point where you're like, oh, maybe I'm overdoing it and I'm analyzing something about an analysis?
You absolutely can get there. I've been there, paralysis by analysis. Some of it is experience. Sometimes you just have to go through it. I think as you get more experienced and more versed into creating those business cases, into doing that kind of cost benefit analysis, or even just, risk analysis, you get a lot more of gut intuition that you can leverage just based on your experiences. And that grows over time. But, I think we've all been there. And I think if anybody tells you that they haven't been paralyzed by analyzing, they're lying to you.
So true. So, okay, just to come back a step, what would be the main elements that you'd personally focus on when presenting a business case to a CFO? And then the other side of that would be, is there anything specific that people should avoid when speaking to like the CFO? Like maybe they should take their foot off the gas pedal on this front. Is there anything specific that opposite end of the spectrum that you'd like to illuminate today?
Yeah, I mean, so with regards to the stuff I focus on, I think I've already mentioned, right? The objectives and scope, the return on investment, showing that you've done your financial and risk analysis, cost benefit analysis to formulate your recommendations. Things that you should absolutely avoid is the overemphasis on the technical jargon, right? And the technical details. Like ultimately, the CFO doesn't care how solution XYZ is going to solve problem ABC. He just cares that it is. He or she just cares that it is. And so, dial back on that. Dial back on that. And then a lot of it is kind of showing your cards if you have a lack of financial justification or or an inadequate understanding of your organization's financial metrics or ignoring the organization's financial constraints. Like you just went through a round of layoffs and you're, barging in, proposing a multi-million-dollar project. Right, that's kind of being tone deaf to the organization. And then, neglecting risks and neglecting alternative strategies. It's kind of the antithesis of what I said before, but it's exactly that, because then you're showing your cards as a CISO that you are not a business enabler. You are not a business aligned CISO. You are more of the tech guy that needs to go, quote unquote, sit back in the corner and not have that seat at the table because you're just not capable of having those high-level conversations about what does cybersecurity mean to the business? What does marketing mean to the overall business? What does operations mean to the overall business, right? And how you can support those.
So you mentioned company value. Now, this is a large one, and there's so many ways to interpret it, but you raised this originally, so I'm really curious to know, what does this mean to you?
Well, there's different ways you can go to it, but like what we see in the news all the time is that a company got acquired for X, or a company has a market cap of Y. And so company value, like book term, just means the net worth of a company. It's the sum of its revenue, its assets, its brand, its financial performance, its market position, intellectual property, customer base, all sorts of other factors. Valuation is the process of determining the monetary value for your company, or what's another company going to pay for it, or what is the market value of a company? What is that valuation? Which is simple in the terms of your stock price times the number of outstanding shares, and there's your market cap, right? But I think it's uber critical to understand how your organization increases value and also how it destroys value. It may destroy value by discontinuing a product or spinning off a division into another company, doing a divestiture. So understanding the hows and whys behind that, specifically how does your organization create value, maintain value? There's a tool called a value map that just Google it anywhere. You can find to understand how your company drives value. There's another tool called the business model canvas, which you can use to identify the various areas within the organization, what they do to the organization to provide value. Stakeholder mapping, how do you map the stakeholders throughout your organization? Do you understand who's who in the zoo and how they drive value for the organization? And then I think only after that can you sit back and say, all right, we have this need. I'm proposing a cybersecurity initiative, whether it be a change in people behavior, processes, or technologies, and we're going to increase company value in this way and directly align it to that.
Do you think that this is something that people aren't focused on enough? Because like what you said makes sense, but of course people got day-to-day things to do. They're trying to keep their head above the water, trying to keep the lights on. They got a lot of stuff going on. So like this maybe is something that falls to the wayside because they got so much else going on.
I agree. And so much of the focus on many times is on top line revenue. And that's kind of default in people's minds about what value to the organization means. More revenue, the company must be more valuable, right? No. I mean, there's so much more that goes into it. And there are different valuation techniques, right? And different industries lean on different types of valuation techniques, from kind of your traditional market-based valuation, or a comparable company analysis, to income-based valuation, to asset-based valuation, understanding distributed cash flows, all those sorts of things. Yeah. And especially in the CISO chair, we're rarely having those conversations. But again, if you go through your stakeholder mapping and value stream analysis, you can understand what various components drive value for your company.
Yeah, look, I don't think there's many CISOs sitting back in their chair and twiddling their thumbs because they got so much other stuff to do. But I think these things are important, right? And I had a conversation with another CISO here in Australia, and he's like, it's hard because we're so busy doing operational stuff to really think about these things strategically. We're so busy in trying to do all these things. It's hard to sit back and ask this question, what about the value of the company? So is there any sort of recommendations you'd make to people that are perhaps they are wanting to move more in direction, they are wanting to think more strategically and think about the value and think about that overall sort of vision and picture? Is there anything that you would sort of impart on our audience today that perhaps they can start doing to get more down that path?
If you're in a current role and you're mired in the operational day-to-day firefighting, try and delegate more. I know it's not easy. It's easier said than done, but you do need to free up your time to focus on longer-term strategies, longer-term initiatives, how you're going to benefit the business. We're in a weird time right now where there's both a huge cybersecurity talent gap, but also budgets are getting crunched. So we don't even have the opportunity to address those talent gaps. And burnout in our industry is real. So that's why I say there's no like silver bullet, if you will, for solving that problem. But then it's honestly a lot of self-initiative. You've got to understand that the evolving role of the CISO means that the CISO is no longer just a technical leader. They have to be a business leader, and you have to be able to bridge that technical and business gap, and then figure out what works for you. Is it picking up books? Is it YouTube videos? Is it going through a formal MBA program? Whatever works for you, figure it out and commit to learning. Commit to continuous learning. Commit to continuous learning in items outside of cybersecurity. You can keep up with cybersecurity. I mean, you're getting Twitter feeds and newsletters and articles all day long. That's easy to keep up with. That's part of your morning email reading routine. But what are you doing after hours to improve yourself on the other side, on the business side? And that's where you got to take that self-initiative and just get up off your chair and go do it.
Thanks for tuning in. We hope that you found today's episode useful and you took away a few key points. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast to get our latest episodes.
This podcast is brought to you by MercSec, the specialists in security, search, and recruitment solutions. Visit mercsec.com to connect today.
If you'd like to find out how KBI can help grow your cyber business, then please head over to kbi.digital.
This podcast was brought to you by KBI.media, the voice of cyber.